Before you begin listening to this story, I want you to ask yourself one question. How many times in your life have you looked up at the sky and asked God, "Why me?" How many times have you carried a weight you never asked for, faced a problem you didn't deserve, or lost something you loved with everything inside you? Now, what if I told you that those problems were exactly the answer you needed? This is the story of a man named Elias, a simple man, a man who worked the earth with his hands, who smelled of rain and dust, who fell asleep with a broken body and woke up with an even more broken soul. A man who lost everything, and who, in the end, fell to his knees on dry ground and gave thanks for every single one of his losses. If you have ever doubted God, life, or yourself, this story is for you. Stay, because this will change the way you see your problems forever. Once upon a time, in a small village surrounded by mountains and forgotten by the world, there lived a farmer named Elias. He was not famous. He was not wealthy. He had no name that anyone would remember beyond the 3 dusty streets of his little town. But he had something many men would envy without fully understanding. He had land, a piece of earth his father had left him, that his grandfather had sweated blood to buy before him. The land was not large, but it was his. Every morning, Elias rose before the sun dared to appear. He placed his feet on the cold wooden floor, breathed in the damp pre-dawn air, and walked out to the fields with tools over his shoulder. Not because anyone told him to, not because a boss was waiting, but because the land, like a living thing, asked for his attention. It demanded his presence. And he answered. His hands were thick as tree bark, his back curved forward as though carrying the invisible weight of entire generations. His eyes, some indefinite color between brown and exhaustion, watched the horizon every evening with a strange mixture of gratitude and questioning. He had a wife. Her name was Rosa, and in her name was everything she was. Soft, fragrant, with thorns that only appeared when someone tried to hurt her. Rosa was the reason Elias sang while he plowed. She was the reason hard work felt like privilege rather than punishment. They had 2 children, Santiago, the eldest, serious like his father, and Lucia, the youngest, curious like the moon that changes shape each night but never fully disappears. Elias's life was not perfect, but it was real. It was honest.
Sweetie.
It was his. And for a time, that was enough. But life rarely lets a man rest in his sufficiency. It was a Tuesday, or perhaps a Wednesday, because bad days never announced their names clearly. The sky donned a strange color. Not the gray of blessed rain, but the gray of threat, of something coming that doesn't ask permission. Elias saw it early. He felt something in his bones, in that part of the body that learns to read the weather before the weather makes itself known. But he had debts, he had commitments, he had seeds to plant and deadlines to meet. So he kept working. And the storm came. It was not a normal storm. It was the kind of storm that the village elders would describe years later in low, grave voices, shaking their heads, as if speaking of it too loudly might summon it. It was the kind of storm that rewrites the landscape, that takes what you knew and returns it unrecognizable. The rain fell for 3 days. 3 days during which Elias and Rosa stuffed rags into the gaps of windows. The children slept curled into each other. The livestock cried in a way that made you think that even animals could know fear. When it stopped, Elias's field had vanished. Not all of it, but almost. The freshly planted seeds swept away, the irrigation channels destroyed, the small shed where he kept his most valuable tools overturned as though it had been made of cardboard. Elias walked through his wet, ruined earth in silence. He did not cry. He did not shout. He stood in the center of what remained, looked up at the sky, which was now strangely clean and blue, as if the storm had never existed, and said in a low voice, jaw tight, "Why, Lord?" And the sky did not answer. Because the sky sometimes leaves us sitting with our question long enough for us to find the answer inside ourselves. What the storm didn't destroy, envy threatened to finish. Because 2 kilometers from Elias's land lived a man named Marcos. Marcos was what many would call a fortunate man. His land sat at a higher elevation, naturally protected from flooding. His crops had barely suffered, and Marcos, who had never been a cruel man but had never been a particularly wise one either, made the mistake many make when they see another person suffering. He compared out loud. "I prepared properly," he told Elias one day in the village square in front of other men. "I read the sky, I built my drainage channels ahead of time. Preparation, Elias, that is what separates the man who prospers from the man who sinks." The words fell like stones. Elias didn't respond. He clenched his teeth, bowed his head, and kept walking. But that night, in the darkness of his room, with Rosa sleeping beside him and the sound of wind outside, Elias felt something he had never felt before with such force: bitterness. He began to wonder if Marcos was right, if he had been careless, if his faith that God would provide had not actually been faith at all, but laziness dressed up as spirituality. He began to compare himself. And comparison is one of the most dangerous traps that exists, because it always makes us look at another man's harvest without seeing the soil we ourselves have prepared. But there was something Elias did not yet know. There was something time was keeping, waiting to reveal to him. And Marcos would discover it soon enough. There is a difference between the man who falls and the man who stays on the ground. Both fell, but only one decides what to do with the earth beneath his feet. Elias spent 2 weeks in something resembling grief. He did the minimum necessary things, fed his children, helped Rosa, checked what remained of his land. But inside, he was in a dark place. That place where men go when their plans break apart and they haven't yet found the courage to make new ones. It was Rosa who brought him back. Not with grand words, not with a speech full of wisdom, but with something small and powerful. One morning, very early, she placed on the table a glass of black coffee, a piece of bread, and a seed. A single seed. Elias looked at it. He lifted it between his fingers. It was a corn seed, ordinary, the kind he himself had planted hundreds of times. "What is this?" he asked. Rosa sat across from him, looked him in the eyes, and said simply, "It's what we have left, and it's enough to begin." Elias looked down. Something inside him moved. Something broke open in order to open, like the shell of a seed that must crack before it can become a root. And what happened next changed not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. In the next part of this story, you will see how Elias faced the moment that made him question everything he believed. A moment where he had to choose to give up or to trust that pain was preparing him for something greater. And the decision he made is something you will never forget. So don't miss part 2, because the harvest was closer than he ever imagined. Like this video if you believe pain can teach. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Stories that don't promise life will be easy, but that remind you that you have everything you need to walk through it. And remember, you are not what you lost. You are what you decided to do after losing it. See you in the next video.